Alexander McQueen, Story of Pain, Fashion, and Revolution. What happens when a working-class boy from London, marked by bullying and a troubled soul, enters the world of high fashion? He doesn't sew simple dresses. He creates emotions. He shakes. He unsettles. He mesmerizes. By the late 80s and early 90s, fashion had become a battlefield between two worlds that could never meet. On one side, the sharp minimalism of Prada and Helmut Lang, where less is more was gospel. On the other, the lavish, fearless opulence of Gianni Versace, celebrating excess without apology. Two worlds apart, two languages that never spoke the same tongue. And in between, a void waiting for someone bold enough to rewrite the rules. But London was telling another story. The British capital was bubbling with creativity. The Britpop sound of Oasis and Blur blended with the energy of the rave scene. Clubs became laboratories of style, and the air was filled with a hunger for rebellion. The fashion world felt distant, almost untouchable, but the city was ready to change that. And at the very heart of this aesthetic revolution, he arrived, Alexander McQueen. Alexander McQueen didn't just want to dress people, he wanted to shake them, to shock them, to hit them in the gut. He didn't design clothes, he created visions. His shows weren't simple runways. They were hypnotic performances, immersive experiences, blending beauty and brutality, dream and nightmare. There were designers who made clothes. And then there were artists who turned fashion into pure expression, into an emotional manifesto. That's who Alexander McQueen was. Now, get ready to see how it all took shape. How a boy who grew up in the shadows turned every runway into a revolution, and every garment into raw emotion. A force powerful enough to shake not just fashion, but the entire world. Before we dive into the extraordinary story of Alexander McQueen, I invite you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, Quotes of Style. Here, you'll find the most fascinating and inspiring stories from the world of fashion, along with the quotes that have defined eras and shaped style. Click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the upcoming exclusive videos. Thank you. Now, let's step into the world of Alexander McQueen and discover how a boy who grew up in the shadows transformed the runway into a stage of emotion, revolution, and pure visual poetry, leaving an indelible mark on the history of fashion. East London, Stratford. Princes of fashion aren't born here. Here, you grow up among crumbling buildings, black cabs, and dreams far too big for working-class pockets. And yet, on March 17, 1969, in a modest home in Lewisham, someone was born who would change everything. Lee Alexander McQueen. The youngest of 6 children. His father, Ronald, was a taxi driver. His mother, Joyce, a loving history teacher, warm, gentle, and endlessly curious. A simple family, worlds away from the glittering universe of fashion. And him, Lee Alexander? A shy, awkward boy, too chubby to go unnoticed, too different to be accepted. Classmates mocked him, humiliated him, shut him out. They called him ugly. Words became invisible wounds. Every laugh, a blow, every glance, a verdict. But inside Lee Alexander's mind, another world existed. A world made of fabrics coming to life, of flawless lines, of impossible silhouettes. A refuge of beauty within a hostile reality. He draws, sketch after sketch, losing entire days imagining dresses that don't yet exist. Years later, looking back on his past, he would say, "The things people said to me as a child hurt me deeply, but they also taught me not to be afraid." Those wounds never truly healed, but they fueled his art, turning pain into revolution. At 16, encouraged by his mother, who had always believed in his talent, he made a decision that would change his destiny. He left school and went looking for work. His path led him to the temple of men's tailoring, Savile Row. Here, there were no insults, only needles, threads, and iron discipline. It was here that Lee Alexander learned the rules of tailoring, the perfect cut, absolute precision. But above all, he learned something even more important. Rules exist to be broken. One story that would stay with him forever came from his first days at Savile Row. He once said, "When I arrived there, I felt like I'd stepped into a completely different world. Fashion is like a battlefield. There are rules, but you should never follow them completely." And that rebellion against tradition would become his signature. Alexander McQueen would never be just a tailor. He would be a revolutionary. At 20, Lee Alexander McQueen, driven by the urge to learn and refine his talent, worked as a pattern cutter for Japanese designer Koji Tatsuno, known for his dramatic and visionary style. But his true opportunity came in 1990, when he moved to Italy to join the design studio of Romeo Guili. He left without speaking a word of Italian, without a degree, but with fierce determination and a burning desire to make his mark. Romeo Guili, an icon of 80s and 90s fashion, was a master of poetic, minimalist, and exotic style. His creations were intimate, dreamlike, far removed from the decade's aggressiveness. But Lee Alexander was far too rebellious to bow to the rules. After a warning from the designer, he decided to leave a mark of his disapproval, stitching the words "fuck you" hidden inside a garment. That act of rebellion wasn't a sign of arrogance. It was proof that he would never be a conventional designer. His time in Italy taught him the value of craftsmanship and sartorial discipline, but Lee Alexander McQueen felt that his destiny lay elsewhere. In 1992, he decided to return to London and enroll at Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design, a school that had shaped some of fashion's greatest talents, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. Here, despite lacking a traditional academic background, his portfolio and hands-on experience earned him direct admission into the master's program. During those years at Central St. Martin's, Lee Alexander McQueen didn't just study. He carved out his creative identity, refined his technique, and experimented without fear. Every cut, every drape, was an act of rebellion and precision. His graduation collection, titled "Jack the Ripper Stalks His Victims," drew attention for its originality and audacity. Lee Alexander was just a young man with a dream, and a final collection that left the audience breathless. Dresses cut with surgical precision, dramatic volumes, and a daring spirit that seemed to scream to the world. Fashion isn't just about beauty, it's pure emotion. And in that room, among the spectators, was someone who understood it instantly: Isabella Blow. Isabella Blow wasn't just any spectator. She was a fashion icon, a visionary, a discoverer of talent, assistant to Anna Wintour, muse to photographers and designers, but above all, a woman who could recognize genius the moment she saw it. And Lee Alexander McQueen was exactly that. After the show, Isabella Blow did something unthinkable. She bought the entire collection for £5,000 and became his mentor, his muse, his greatest supporter. It was she who convinced him to change the name on his designs, from Lee Alexander McQueen to Alexander McQueen. It was she who introduced him to the right people and pushed him into the spotlight of high fashion. With Isabella Blow by his side, Alexander McQueen was ready to shake the fashion world. And in 1993, he presented Taxi Driver, a collection inspired by London's underground, raw, nocturnal, subversive. But it was with Highland Rape that chaos truly erupted. Models with haunted eyes walked down a shattered runway, torn dresses, exposed bodies. The audience was in shock. Some applauded. Others cried scandal. They accused McQueen of misogyny, but he explained, "It's not a celebration of brutality, it's a statement against it." Highland Rape told the story of Scotland's suffering at the hands of England in the 18th century, a subject that struck him deeply, for Alexander McQueen carried Scottish blood. It wasn't provocation for its own sake. It was a cry of pain, an artistic manifesto. That day, the legend was born, and from Paris, someone was watching. In 1996, Alexander McQueen accepted the challenge of becoming the creative director of Givenchy. But behind that decision lay something deeper. Years earlier, during a school trip while studying at St. Martin's, he had snuck into Paris Fashion Week. He watched a Givenchy show and, without thinking, blurted out, "Givenchy? That's just rubbish for old ladies. I'd never work there." Cutting words, spoken with the arrogance of a young revolutionary. And yet, just a few years later, there he was, running the very same maison. He was everywhere, on every headline, an ironic twist of fate. Givenchy was a huge opportunity, but Paris never won him over. Too rigid, too distant from his world. Alexander McQueen wasn't made for the rules of haute couture, for its cushioned luxury, its suffocating expectations. He didn't want to be the next Galliano. He didn't want to follow a path already laid out. He wanted his own, no matter the cost. But that cost would be higher than he ever imagined. His collections for Givenchy were an earthquake. He took history, tore it apart, and rebuilt it into something both brutal and sublime. The audience was mesmerized, but behind the scenes, the weight became unbearable. Alexander McQueen was a man divided, genius and torment, success and solitude. The applause filled the rooms, but inside him, the emptiness grew deeper and deeper. Despite the awards, the recognition, and the adoration of the fashion world, Alexander McQueen felt that Givenchy was not his place. Paris was suffocating him. The rules of luxury, the compromises, the expectations. He wasn't made for any of it. In 2001, after 5 years, he left Givenchy and Paris behind. He didn't do it with regret, but with a sense of liberation. Now he could devote himself entirely to his art and push his own brand even further. And he did it right away. His show, Voss, was a masterpiece of provocation and symbolism. A glass room, models trapped inside like patients in an asylum, moving with an eerie, claustrophobic energy. At the end, the glass shattered, revealing a shocking scene, a naked woman lying on a chaise longue, wearing horns and a gas mask, surrounded by moths. It was writer Michelle Ollie. The image was powerful, unsettling. Alexander McQueen wasn't simply creating fashion. He was revealing, unfiltered, his inner world. His goal wasn't to please, but to provoke, to disturb, to move. As he once said, "I don't want to do shows where you leave feeling like you've just had Sunday lunch. I want you to leave feeling disgusted or inspired. But I want them to be real emotions. If you leave without feeling anything, then I've done my job wrong." By the early 2000s, Alexander McQueen was at his peak. His name was everywhere. He was praised, celebrated, idolized. But inside, he was falling apart. He was designing 14 collections a year, an impossible pace, a machine that never stopped. He was exhausted. But success left no room for rest. The press wrote about him, called him a genius, but he was convinced the fashion world hated him. And then came the money. Too much, too fast. With it came the dark side of fame. Drugs, which brought insomnia, depression, the desperate need to escape. Cocaine became a refuge, but it made him volatile, angry. The rage burned inside him like a fire. He no longer recognized himself. In 2007, Alexander McQueen suffered a devastating loss. Isabella Blow, his greatest supporter, took her own life, consumed by the depression that had haunted her in her final years. She wasn't just a muse, she was his ally, his family. Her death shook him to the core. The void she left behind was impossible to fill. His art, once the expression of his brilliance, became more and more a dark reflection of his pain. And then, there was his image, his body. He had never liked it. He underwent liposuction, hoping it would make him feel better about himself. But when he looked in the mirror, the emptiness was still there. "I changed my physical appearance, and I did it in vain. All I did was lose touch with who I was." Alexander McQueen was drifting away from everything, and soon he would lose the most important thing in his life. By 2010, Alexander McQueen was higher than ever, and yet more alone than ever. His spring-summer collection, Plato's Atlantis, was a masterpiece of innovation. The iconic armadillo shoes mesmerized the world, and the show made history as the first ever to be streamed live online. The runway became an underwater realm, models moving like creatures of the deep, wearing sleek, iridescent mini-dresses with prints that evoked the skin of sea reptiles, while the vibrant colors seemed to mirror the ocean's darkest depths. It was the apocalypse, seen through the eyes of Alexander McQueen. And on that historic night, as the world watched this visionary spectacle, Lady Gaga debuted Bad Romance, amplifying the magic of an already legendary event. But behind the triumph, Alexander McQueen was sinking into loneliness. His creativity, once his escape, had become an unbearable weight. His art, once a reflection of his brilliance, now carried a haunting sadness. On the runway, there were no longer just clothes. There was his inner struggle, screamed through beauty and torment. His fears kept growing. During a 2004 interview, his mother Joyce once asked him, "What's your greatest fear?" Alexander McQueen replied, "Dying before you." In 2010, that fear turned into tragedy. The death of his mother on February 2, 2010, left him without an anchor. The pain that had consumed him for years now seemed unstoppable, and with it came the inevitable. On February 11, 2010, the day before his mother's funeral, Alexander McQueen made his decision. In his London home, he took his own life, hanging himself after taking a combination of cocaine, sleeping pills, and tranquilizers. He was only 40 years old. 2 weeks later, on February 25th, at St. Paul's Church in Knightsbridge, London, his final farewell was held. Through the aisles, grief was palpable. Familiar faces from the world of fashion, Kate Moss, Naomi Campbell, Stella McCartney, were there. But the true presence that day was silence. Months later, at St. Paul's Cathedral, thousands gathered to pay tribute. Friends, icons of fashion and entertainment, and ordinary people who simply loved his work. Björk performed Gloomy Sunday, wrapped in a gown designed by him. Her voice cut through the air. Alexander McQueen was gone, but his genius still echoes. The fragility of life. One moment you're here, the next you're gone. With these words, Alexander McQueen reminds us how unpredictable life can be, and how, so often, it's within fragility that true strength is born. His art was a constant journey of self-discovery, a path woven with fear and beauty. Every step he took was an act of courage. Every creation, a revolution. Thank you for sharing with me the story of a man who turned his fears into art and his fragility into timeless masterpieces. Stay tuned to Quotes of Style to discover more visionaries who, like Alexander McQueen, changed the world of fashion through passion, freedom, and vision. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next story.